Welcome to For the Love of Books, a podcast by Lanarkshire Libraries. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Lanarkshire Libraries podcast For the Love of Books. My name is Chris Wilson, the E-Services Librarian, and today I've got another local author interview for you guys. As regular listeners of the podcast will know that I do like to try and get a hold of an author to kind of speak to, and today I managed to get hold of a local author who I discovered in the interview is actually from North Lanarkshire. I didn't realise that. I thought he was from Glasgow, but it just turns out he is a North Lanarkshire born and bred, and his name's John Gillick, and he has recently released his second book, The Scars of Fate, and he is going to tell us all about it and also a little bit about his background, including a background in comedy, which is fantastic, and the interview that I had with him, which I recorded with him during Book Week Scotland last week, and hopefully you'll enjoy hearing a lot more about him and his books. Here he is now. So, hi John, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I always enjoy hearing from local authors and finding out a little bit about them and what inspired them and stuff like that. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, and I'm a little bit intrigued to find out a little bit more about the Funny Farm, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing. I thought I saw whenever I was looking up more about you.
Right. Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Congratulations on knowing about the Funny Farm. I thought that I had vanished into, the mists of time, never to be heard of ever again. But I don't know if you know, but it was a comedy collective, a self-booking, self-financing, self-generating comedy collective based in Glasgow. It was started by the founders were people like Stu who sadly died earlier this year, Fred Macaulay, a guy called Parrot, and Lewis MacLeod, who's now really quite a famous voiceover artist, and another guy called Kevin Copstein, a magician who's doing very well in Australia. So they were the founding members of this, as I say, comedy collective. That really did quite well for an awful long time, particularly during remember the Year of Culture, when they were just throwing money at things like comedy and stuff like that. So that was the kind of, and I basically entered a competition called So You Think You're Funny, 1988 I think it was, and I didn't win it, but I met all these people, and it kind of it made me visible, and I was subsequently asked to join the Funny Farm myself, and I was probably about the second intake, along with guys like John Paul Leach and another guy called Alex Frackleton, who's now living in the Czech Republic. So a lot of time has passed since those days, but that was the background to me joining the Funny Farm. Which was a really exciting time, and we did festivals and we did gigs all over the place, and it really was. I'm really happy I've been part of that. How did I go from there to writing?
Yeah, so how did you go from kind of being part of a comedy collective to kind of now writing kind of crime and thriller novels? That's kind of a bit of a different take of kind of career move.
Absolutely, not one that was planned. Although I'd always been in my mind. I remember years before, a friend of mine that I knew through comedy wrote a book, early 90s, and I remember thinking, I've just been really impressed and thinking what a wonderful thing to do. Never thinking I would ever do anything like that myself. But it was always there in the back of my mind, and basically, when I stopped and a lot of other people stopped performing during COVID, I kind of went back, to thinking about it. And what kicked it off was years before I had started writing this story, when I had been on a holiday in Benidorm, and the weather was terrible. I don't know how I ended up in Benidorm in the first place, but I did. and an idiotic travel agent. Anyway, I ended up in this hotel in the middle of winter. I think it was January. The weather was dreadful, and I was sitting in my room thinking, I'll go down to the bar and I'll take my book with me. Because I couldn't sit outside, it was too cold. I couldn't go near the pool. And I went down to the bar, and there was a bunch of pensioners having a tea dance, who are probably younger than I am now. But I remember thinking at the time, sod this for a game of soldiers. And I went up to my room and I started writing a story, just based on, kind of loosely based on things that I had observed in Benidorm and just other bits and bobs. And that was it. Nothing came of it. I did nothing with it. I started writing it, left it alone for about 18 years. And because I wasn't gigging, during lockdown, I went back to it. And so that and certain things that happened in my life made me think I could do stuff. I could, use this and maybe go. And I did, and I actually went back and finished it during lockdown. So that was the kind of a start of it. My first book being finished from an idea that I had in a hotel in Benidorm about 18, 20 years before.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Cause I mean, obviously, having that kind of like you wrote, kind of got a bit of a start a long time ago, and then COVID was such a bizarre time for everyone, and obviously, kind of people gave people a lot of chances to kind of do a lot of things that they probably would have kind of previously tried to do, and
That's right.
And I've heard a few people saying things like they're kind of like, oh, I used that time to write my book and all that sort of stuff. So it's although it was a kind of challenging time probably for most people, at the same time it also kind of gave a lot of people that time to kind of be a bit more creative probably than they maybe kind of would have had the chance to do kind of if that hadn't happened. So it's interesting that that's kind of been the creative part of kind of creative spark, if you like, of this to kind
I
of
think so.
what's
Maybe I needed pardon me, I needed to do something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think you're right. Maybe, I probably was the need to do something creative. The juices weren't getting, used during the stand-up. The funny thing is as well is that I never went back to stand-up after. And that wasn't planned. I just didn't go back. I didn't pick it up. I didn't, actively pursue bookings. I mean, I had a lot of stuff cancelled during COVID, as a lot of other people had, but I didn't go back. And the funny thing was, I didn't miss it. That's the thing that surprised me more than anything else. And I've been to see comedy with friends, and I've never sat there and thought, I wish that was me up there. It's a strange thing. So obviously, the writing the books is doing its job in that respect.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Now, when I started kind of chatting with your publisher about getting you onto the podcast, initially it was to promote your new novel, The Scars of Fate, which I discovered was actually the second book in your Sam Meredith series that you've been writing. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the first book to set the scene a little? And am I right in thinking that it was called One for Sorrow, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is very loosely to do with magpies. I won't, reveal anything, but it's basically the premise of it is that the main character, Sam Meredith, goes on holiday to Benidorm, and he meets a woman. And other certain characters while he's there, but he meets this woman and they spend the night together, and the next morning when he wakes up she's gone, but then she's found murdered the following day. So that was the spark of the thing, that he other than the murderer, although it's not specifically stated that he wasn't the murderer, but in his mind, obviously, he's not, he doesn't see himself as a murderer. But so other than the murder, he sees himself as the last person that saw her alive, which leaves him pretty vulnerable in his mind. So that is the thing that kicks the whole thing off. And I have to say that when I started it, I had no idea how it was going to finish. I just kept going with it, and it just gathered a bit of momentum. So that's the thing. And although I'm quite happy with the way it turned out, because I was quite the way that it's all drawn together really quite pleased me and surprised me, I have to say. And I've kind of developed a pattern where this happens when I'm writing and I have ideas, and I think to myself, I'm not going to do that. It's going to complicate it too much. But it's like I'm moth to a flame. I can't stop myself. It really is. It's quite unnerving. But I know that I just know in my mind that I'm going to have to do it, and that's what happened. I can't give anything away, but the way the book ended was me convincing myself that I was able to do it. Because initially I thought, you're not skilled and experienced enough to do this, to pull this off. But I managed it, and I was quite happy with the way it did all come together at the end. And
that's fantastic.
And nobody was more surprised than me, I have to say.
And now, if we fast forward a few years now, and you've now got book 2 out already, and what was the first book self-published? Is that right?
No, it wasn't.
No, wasn't it?
I thought about that, but again, I didn't really know my way around it. I mean, I knew nothing, other than that I just wanted to write, and it was published by an organisation or a publisher called Strange Media,
right?
Who were very good with me, and kind of guided me through the process. But they didn't do any marketing or there was no publicity or anything like that. And had that been the case, I may well have used them again. I don't know what their situation is, but the marketing was the thing. I thought, because I think I only, I don't know, sold about 70 odds. 70 odd books. Although I was listening to a program on Radio 4 not that long ago, and there's a woman, a female author whose name sadly escapes me, who's now very that famous that I can't remember her name, but she sold like millions of books all over the world now, and she only sold about 60 odd copies of her first book. So that made me think, oh well, but
there's still time.
Aye, well, who knows? I'm not lying awake thinking about it though.
And one of the things that I always think is quite interesting is about kind of the journey a book makes from kind of author to the shelves. So you want to tell us a little bit how Scars of Fate went from being kind of a story in your head and then getting it onto the page and a kind of final book.
It came about. I hadn't planned. I never thought I'd take 3 books, never mind one. But one of the things that the first publishers did, when they put the book together and the cover, they said on the front of it, and in the blurb, they said a Sam Meredith thriller or mystery or whatever it was. In the blurb said the first in a series, and I hadn't planned on it, and I thought, to a certain extent, I thought, good God, I'm going to have to read more of these. Do you know what I mean? But I quite liked the idea of it, and I thought, well, maybe it'll spur me on. And what happened was, partly because of that, but also because I felt that I had more to say about the characters in the first book. I felt that there was more mileage in them, and it proved to be the case. Because I remember somebody using the phrase, I know who it was, a friend of mine, Anna Smith, who's a well-established author, used the phrase, these characters write themselves, and that's what happened. It really just gathered pace and momentum, and it was easy to, it was a lot smoother a process than the first book. Maybe it was to do with the characters, but and I knew where I was going with it, and I knew what the end was as well. So that's how the book came into being. It was just, it was something I had to do. The title is actually a quote from another book.
All right.
So that was the kind of background to the second book coming into being.
Yeah. And
As far as making it to the shelves, sorry, I just remember you saying that.
okay.
It's not really at the stage where it's prominent in bookstores. You can order it online, but it's not at that stage, nor even in libraries. But as you said a minute ago, who knows this time?
Well, we do have. I'm pretty sure we have a copy of it in our library service already, or if not, it's on order. So we do. So our library members can get a hold of it on one of the shelves. Somewhere, I think it's in Coatbridge. I think it is. We've got it.
Oh, right.
And
You're not going to believe this, right? My
Yeah.
first job when I left school, I worked in Coatbridge Library.
well, yeah, really. There
Yes,
you go.
that was my first job after school. I worked in Coatbridge Library.
Let me just try and see if I can check that to make sure that I'm getting that right. And I'm pretty sure we have. And let's see if I can find it here quickly.
I've just been joined by my dog.
That's all right.
I knew that would happen.
It is. So we do have a copy of it at Coatbridge Library.
Oh,
so there you go. There's a nice little link as well. So your first job was at Coatbridge Library, and your book is now on the shelves in Coatbridge Library. So there's a nice little thing for a nice little kind of link between the book and yourself as well. So let's find out a little bit more about the Scars of Fate itself. It's set in Glasgow, and it continues the story of Sam Meredith after your first publisher put you on the spot of creating a series. This time round, there's an encounter ahead of a holiday to Tenerife this time. Is that right? And that's where everything starts off. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what's kind of happening there, and without obviously giving away any spoilers for the story?
I know it. I'll try my best. Actually, when I was telling a friend who actually helped me check or kind of a proofread the first book, and when I told him the idea for the second book, he said that'll never work. And I thought, you might be right, but I thought about it a wee bit longer. So what happened was he booked a holiday. Sam's booked a holiday to Tenerife, but before he heads off, he has an accident with his car, so it needs to go into the garage to get fixed. And en route to the garage to put it in, there's a car wash next door to the garage, and I had mentioned in the first book, I had raised the issue of illegal kind of immigrants and using for illegal labour, like people working in car washes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he sees a guy in the car wash, and he is absolutely convinced that it's the guy with whom he had, let's say, an encounter in the first book, who's a kind of North African guy. And he's pretty central to the plot in the first book, and he's absolutely convinced. So when he goes back to pick his car up, they haven't washed it, and he thinks, well, I'll actually take it through the car wash. And he does, and he engineers actually speaking to the guy. He's still more or less convinced it's the same guy, but once he speaks to the guy, there's something about his demeanour, and his voice, it makes him think, no, it's not him. And he kind of contents himself and thinking, what would he be doing in Glasgow anyway? And then he heads off to Tenerife, and on his first day in Tenerife, as he's walking back to his hotel, he sees the guy again, and he thinks, I am going absolutely mad. He thinks, what is wrong with you? You're obsessed with this guy. And he's absolutely convinced this time. But it's only been days before. But the guy is standing selling flyers for what you would probably say was for like a lap dancing bar or something, which was what he was more or less the same kind of a job he was doing in Benidorm. Yeah. And he walks towards him, and the guy registers surprised when he sees him, and he thinks, my God, it actually is the guy from Benidorm this time. And they have a conversation. And what happens after they have the conversation is that the guy has a further conversation with somebody else, and the person that he has a conversation with then tells somebody that, well, the conversation is repeated to somebody, the last person it should be repeated to, given the event that took place in Benidorm, which is where there were 2 murders in Benidorm.
Right.
And that kicks off a series of events that, as I say, I can't get, I'm trying not to do any spoilers. But there's a lot more murders and people killed in the second one than there is in the first one. It's all as a consequence of well, partly that conversation, but in the third book, it kind of I'm working towards kind of going back to a certain something that happened right at the start of the first book, which I'm hoping I'll be able to achieve. But that is a consequence of that conversation. And as I say, it's quite difficult without giving away any spoilers. There are obviously there are some of the characters in the second book that were in the first book, clearly because that's the reason that I wrote the second book, because I felt there was a story to be told there. And obviously, I think there's still more mileage on it, because I'm in the latter stages, hopefully, of the third book at this point in time.
Yeah. So so we don't kind of give away too much extra spoilers and stuff for the story and things like that. Let's go into the kind of the sort of the locations in the book and stuff. You're from Glasgow, I believe. Is that right?
I'm pardon me. I'm from Airdrie. Actually, I was born in Airdrie.
Yeah. So a nice North Lanarkshire resident, and so I'm assuming it kind of felt quite natural to set at least part of the story kind of in sort of areas that you knew then, as well.
Absolutely. You know what they say, right? What you know about. I ended up doing that a lot more, and the third book is the same. There's a lot of locations in Glasgow at the beginning and the end, but I ended up. I mean, part of the description in the second book, it's not actually, it's actually memories from when I lived in Airdrie, some of the places that I mentioned, but there is obviously mention of places in Glasgow as well, and I quite enjoyed doing that, I have to say. I still enjoy doing it, you know, because I think it gives it a bit of a grounding in reality. Do you know what I mean? It gives it a kind of an authenticity in terms of, and also mentioning actual events, you know, that actually took place. It gives it a location, I think, and I've done that to a certain extent. I've done it in all of the books, really, and I quite enjoy doing that, because I feel that it gives it kind of locates it in a time and a place. You know, and maybe those events are significant for some people. Certainly, they were significant for me. So, I mean, some of them are just there to kind of move the story along. They're not that significant. Do you know what I mean? I know some writers actually use events that have taken place as sometimes as a basis for their whole story. I know that Ian Rankin has done that on several occasions.
Yeah, I think those kind of things help to kind of add a bit of realism to the story as well, which maybe kind of grips the reader in a little bit and makes it kind of feel a bit more kind of like a kind of almost like a real event and real story itself rather than completely fictional, which it kind of maybe kind of.
And it gives my story, if you like, a bit more credibility, in the sense, you know, that it's part of a real world. You know, that was my thought on it anyway.
Yeah. I think that's definitely can surely definitely can be a thing. As well as Glasgow though, there is a bit of a kind of running theme, at least in the first two books, about kind of nice sunny holiday destinations get mentioned a little bit. There's a bit mentioned kind of Benidorm in the first one, and then obviously Tenerife in the second one. Are these places that you know quite well too? And what was the inspiration for choosing those locations to kind of be featured in the book?
I because of that, as I said before, right, what you know about, and because I had started writing the first book, I suppose, when I was in Benidorm, I had actually the reason the second one became located in Tenerife was because a lot of the stuff that happened in the book, as described as happening in Benidorm, actually took place in Tenerife.
Right.
And without giving too much away, in the first book,
Okay.
Sam is mugged. Well, I was actually mugged in Tenerife.
Oh.
I and then had a confrontation with the same person that mugged me days later, and that actually, so those events actually took place. They were real events,
Yeah.
but they happened in Tenerife, and that's what gave me the idea for locating the second one in Tenerife, and also because I do know the area quite well, so I felt that again gave it, because people reading it would think, oh, I know where that is. I've been there and I know that street. I actually went on um, to a holiday. I, I don't want to mention the name of it, but you know, a website, a holiday
Yeah.
website,
Yeah.
and located a map so that I knew what the names of the streets were.
Uh-huh.
That everything was happening on. And because I thought that gave it that bit of authenticity as well. So that's why it
Yeah.
ended up being in Tenerife, and it ends up back in Glasgow again. A lot more so than the first book. There's events, really significant events that take place in the second book at the end. No spoilers, I
Yeah.
won't say anything.
I was going to ask you as well if there was going to be a third book in the series, but you mentioned you're already kind of writing that already. So I was wondering, that made me think, is Sam going to be going off to other kind of holiday
I,
destinations or in the third one?
Surprisingly enough, Chris, it actually starts again obviously in Glasgow, and then and he's not alone this time, but I won't give away any spoilers.
All
Although
right, okay.
you probably, if anybody has read the book, the end of the second book will probably give a clue in that respect. But it starts off in Mijas. Sorry, well, no, that's I'm jumping ahead of myself. Sorry, it starts off in Bergamo in Italy,
Okay. All right, okay.
um, and that's just a kind of a build-up. Really, nothing really significant happens there. It's a build-up, and it's also a kind of a. I've used that as a vehicle, as the beginnings of a relationship, and then but it goes back to Glasgow very briefly, and because the period in between then and the next location is kind of a described very briefly, and the next location is Costa del Sol, and it is Marbella and Mijas, where a really significant event takes place, which was based on a conversation I heard in a bar in Mijas, and that in the same kind of a way with the other two, that kicks off a series of events, totally coincidentally, I have to say, which is what I wanted, because the thing about Sam is that his life is characterized or blighted, depending on your point of view, by coincidence
Yeah.
and chaos to a certain extent. And this is completely, as was his meeting with the guy at the beginning of the second book, was total coincidence. But Sam doesn't believe in coincidence. Um, so maybe he does know something, because these meetings have all proved to be really, significant in one way or another. So the meeting that takes place in Mijas, it becomes really significant, and yet again kicks off the subsequent series of events, which obviously involves other people getting murdered or killed or whatever. He's not the best guy to go on holiday with, I would have to say.
No, it doesn't sound like it. but he does get well travelled, which is good as well. So
he does,
so yeah, it's a kind of interesting kind of concept of kind of having kind of Glasgow in the background and the kind of the main kind of part of the story, and then the kind of holiday destination run about is playing its part as well. So it's very interesting. And I thought to give our listeners a little bit of an idea of your kind of writing style, if you like. Would you say there's any particular authors that you maybe kind of inspired you inspired the way you write and things like that sort of stuff? Do you have any author heroes?
Absolutely. I wouldn't presume to suggest that my writing style is anywhere near as refined and and it's although I have been inspired by certain authors. Most notably, I have to say Ian Rankin, because although I had started the first book, I can't remember just exactly what kind of a stage it was at, but I met Ian Rankin when we were both involved in an event at the Stand Comedy Club in Glasgow. We were both performing. Well, he was actually on before me, so I was backstage kind of earwigging. I did have a conversation, and I'm very proud of it. I've got a really good photograph of the two of us together. But and he was very complimentary about certain things. But the main thrust of his presentation for me was that if you feel like writing, you should just do it. Don't worry about it. Don't get uptight about what it's going to sound like or what other people think or how it's going to end up. Just do it. Just get something down on paper or whatever medium you're using. And that was really significant. And that's partly that was probably one of the things that made me want to finish the book. And I found that it was absolutely right. And that the characters obviously played a big part in that, as I said before. So he was really quite instrumental in that. I then watched a programme all about it kind of followed the process of how he starts and finishes his books and stuff like that, and the process he goes through, and that I found that really inspiring. Because when you're first starting, you're as I said at the start, you never really think that you'll actually do it, but as you get older, and then you have your own life experiences, and that kind of along with the old adage in the back of your head, that everybody's got a book in them. And then you find yourself, well, I found myself reading books by people like Ian Rankin, and other, authors like Christopher Brookmeyer, Val McDermott, and people like that. And I found myself thinking about the structure and the devices and the process they went through when they were writing the books, rather than just reading them. I actually found myself reading some books by other authors that I won't name, and actually thinking to myself, I could write better than that or as good as that. Now, whether I did it or not didn't really matter, because it spurred me on to at least try it. So Ian Rankin, I have to say, has always been an inspiration or a hero of mine anyway, simply because of the books he writes. I mean, I think Rebus is a great creation. There are other ones that I've mentioned, another couple, but there's certainly a lot more along the road. But I would say he's probably the main one.
Yeah, I mean, he is such a superstar writer, really, isn't he? He's gonna the amount of books that he's written over time and stuff like that, and how successful they've been is quite incredible.
Absolutely. Do you know what I love about the Rebus character as well? That was the other thing. Rebus is in real time. You know what I mean? He gets older. Do you know what I mean? And you can actually feel that you're kind of. I've felt that I've kind of aged along with them, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
I think that is a really important thing as well. I know it's a completely different genre and completely different thing, but I always kind of felt that about like with the kind of J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter books, and that I
Right.
feel as if when you read them, they start off kind of very sort of like for sort of young children, but by the time it gets to the end, it is more sort of almost like a young adult like, and
Well,
and
they're
and, and
saying
the
that's right.
audience, yeah, and the audience kind of grows a bit
Absolutely.
with them, you know. And I think that's partly why these do work, because like people do kind of grow with the story and grow with the characters, which is really,
Absolutely.
really good. One thing I just kind of thought of was about, do you think kind of sort of your writing kind of comedy and writing kind of fiction kind of has that kind of background kind of helped you kind of write books, you think? Or is there any kind of crossover there with that? And or is it
I,
kind of, do you feel as if it's completely different?
no, I think you're absolutely right. Because I mean, I did I wrote some sketch stuff before as well, and um, I think there's the process of just putting that together, and also I think my background in social work, when I had to write reports, for meetings and
Yeah.
conferences and courts as well. And I've always thought that my command of English was pretty good anyway.
Hmm.
So I think they all in their own way kind of offered something
Hmm.
that became part of the kind of skill set that I needed. And it gave me, I mean, each bit of that, if you like, that jigsaw gave me a wee bit more kind of belief and confidence, because I knew I had certain skill sets and was able to do certain things. So I think you're right, and I think that the comedy was a greater bit of it as well.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and there's comedy. There's comedy. You know what? A funny thing, it just reminded me. I met somebody. It was a woman who was a writer. I can't remember her name. And we had a conversation, and the one thing that she said that kind of unnerved me a wee bit, it didn't put me off, but it kind of made me think, was that she didn't think that comedy sat well in like books, like mystery thrillers, um, unless it was used in a jocular way, obviously by the main characters, and
Mhm.
and that wasn't really the way that I was using the comedy, and it made me think, is this not going to work? But the
Yeah,
people that have read the books, I've had a lot of good feedback about the role that the comedy has played in the books.
yeah,
So I'm glad I went and did it,
mm,
rather than taking her advice. I mean, I'm sure it was meant in the best possible way,
yeah,
but it did make me think. But I'm glad I just went with it, because I think that I think it's got a place in my writing. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. Maybe comes out that whole kind of like sort of write what you know kind of thing. That obviously you had kind of quite a success with that kind of background and stuff like that in the past, so kind of incorporating that and kind of works a little bit for you in that way. Now, I thought, can I ask if do you have any kind of plans for any sort of events, or is that the kind of things you'd like to do to try and kind of further promote the books and stuff like that in the future, for that anyone might be able to come along to, or kind of get involved in?
No, I haven't. But you're absolutely right. That's kind of things that I didn't have with the first book, that I'm hoping that the publishers will um, eventually be able to come up with. So far, I haven't. I know. I think I have spoken to them about. I think it's called. I, I think it's something like author focus. That they do on the website.
Right.
As far as events are concerned, I don't have any. There's no like book signings or anything like that planned. It's maybe a conversation that I will have with them at some point. Um, the the publicity department have been quite good. They've really been quite active, proactive, and helpful with me
Yeah.
in the latter stages of the book. So I'm hoping that that's a conversation I can have with them in the near future.
Yeah, so maybe kind of keep our eyes open for kind of possibility of might appear in like some bookstores or libraries or whatever in the future. And people might be able to come along to that.
It's actually book. I don't know if it's National Book Week or Scottish Book Week, but I've been getting a lot of stuff online. There's a lot of libraries having a lot of authors along and
so
talking about things.
Yeah, so this podcast will go out next week, but while we're recording this, it is Book Week Scotland, which is a national event that we have in Scotland every year in November to kind of basically celebrate reading and books and authors and stuff like that, which libraries get heavily involved in. So it was kind of good to kind of get it recorded during Book Week, just the way the schedule fell. Unfortunately, we couldn't kind of put it out during Book Week on itself, but it's good to be able to record it in that some kind of in a way you've kind of got a little bit of a Book Week Scotland event sort of thing happening, which is nice. And
I'm very grateful for this, I have to say.
and who knows, maybe next year we can kind of get something more kind of Book Week Scotland activities stuff planned as well. I know a lot of book fans like to kind of follow their favourite authors and stuff like that online and stuff. So I was kind of thought I'd maybe can see if you could mention anything about where they can, any kind of potential listeners or fans could kind of follow you on social media and things like that sort of stuff. So you do have a couple of social media accounts, don't you?
I'm fairly kind of unexciting in that respect. It's just Facebook and Instagram. Although, unfortunately, I have decided that I will be closing both and opening new accounts because there's been a lot of kind of strange stuff happening. I was hacked for a while back, and I've just never felt that it's been the same since. So, and maybe it's just my suspicious nature, but my intention is to close my account to my Instagram and Facebook account and create new ones. So, but I will get 2 new accounts up and running. But that's it. That's the extent of it. I'm not on X at this point in time. So I'll maybe do something about that as well. But other than that, there isn't any other.
I watch this space in terms of you taking over social media and promoting your book there and stuff like that.
It couldn't have happened. I mean, really, it couldn't happen at a worse time, given the fact that I had just had the book published, and that's the reason that I didn't. But I have to do it just for my own peace of mind. But I will be up and running again as soon as possible.
Yeah. Fantastic. And finally, one of the things I always like to find out of my guests is if they're reading any books recently that is something they would like to kind of recommend to any listeners as well. So has there been anything that you've kind of been reading recently that you think would be worth kind of mentioning and seeing if anyone would maybe kind of want to kind of read along as well with?
I've got a pile of books that I'm kind of making my way through. I just finished a really good book by a new author for me by the name of M.W. Craven. Mm-hmm. And the book that I've just finished was The Puppet Show, which I really, really enjoyed, but it's far too complex for me to try and explain. The one before that, which is now quite a famous book, I believe, which is The Midnight Library. Pardon me, Midnight Library.
Yeah.
By Matt Haig.
Yeah.
Which is a wonderful book.
Yeah.
And I won't try and explain that one either.
The Midnight Library is one of my favourite books, I have to say. It's a fantastic book. Yeah. And
it's so easy to read.
Yeah, it is. I'm a big Matt Haig fan. I think his books are really, really fantastic.
I heard an interview with him on, I think it was Radio 2, or I think it was Radio 2. Oh no, maybe Radio Scotland. Where he'd written a book about vampires and everybody hated it. But then I think it went on to become reasonably successful. He's actually got a new book out, and I can't remember the name of that.
I think the new book is called The Impossible Life, I think.
Well, there you go.
Something like that. Yeah, which I haven't read
About
yet,
your
but it
superior
is.
knowledge.
Which it's definitely my to read list for sure, but I've not got around to it just yet.
The other books that I've got waiting to be read are Mayflies by Andrew Hagan and
Mhm.
Chuggy Bane, which won the Booker Prize by
Yeah.
W. Stewart. I was asked recently to name my 3 favourite books, and it really wasn't easy, I have to say. But for the sake of simply because I now I've narrowed it down to 3. The first one is The Shadow of the Wind by a wonderful Spanish author called Carlos Ruiz Zafón.
What a book! That again. That is. I think that is. Oh, I'm joining you in putting that in my top 3 for sure.
Well, that's where the phrase "the scars of fate" comes from, because in the book, the actual quote is coincident because Sam's life is characterized or blighted by coincidence. The quote from the book is "coincidences are the scars of fate." So that's what gave me the idea. And as soon as I read it, actually, to be honest with you, as soon as I read that line, I knew. And actually, there was a wee bit of an issue getting it printed because of copyright issues, but thankfully the publishers went with it. The other 2 were a wonderful book by an Irish author whose name is going to escape me. Anyway, the name of the book is The Salesman, and the book is by Joseph O'Connor, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's terrible. God, I hope I haven't got that wrong. Anyway, that's what I thought that was one of the best books I've ever read. And the third one is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak.
Do you know, John? I think we have got very similar tastes in books. I haven't read the Salesman one, but The Midnight Library, The Shadow of the Wind, and The Book Thief are 3 of. They would be very high in my list. I don't know if they'd be the top 3,
there you go.
But they would definitely
so
be in it. So that's a good selection of books here. I think John and I will both recommend those books.
I would highly recommend The Salesman to you.
I'll need to maybe check that one out then. If the other ones kind of feature highly for you, that might be one for me to check out for definite, because those other 3 are definitely kind of 3 of my favourite books of all time for sure, and they are definitely worth a read if anyone hasn't read them already, because they're fantastic reads for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, John, thank you very much for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your books, and I hope that they go really well. Can't wait to see how kind of book 3 coming out and how that goes as well. It's been great to hear from you and find out all about the books.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much.
So there you go, guys. Thank you, John, for coming and speaking to us and telling us all about Scars of Fate. It sounds like a fantastic book to read, and it is available is in Coatbridge Library. And what a fantastic little link there to have his book in the location where he had his first job as well, which is a nice little thing we found out during the interview as well, which is lovely. It's definitely worth checking out if you guys think it's interesting. It sounded interesting for you, and eventually you'll be able to kind of look out for book 3 as well whenever John finally gets it finished as well. So thank you guys for listening, and again, thank you for John for coming and talking to us. That's all I've got time for now for this podcast, but we will be back again very, very soon with another episode for you guys to enjoy. But that's all from me for now, guys. Bye bye.